It's ad break time. I'm pleased to announce that the Beyond Solitaire podcast remains proudly sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. And as usual, they are up to amazing things. Their latest game, 500-Year-Old Vampire, just finished a very successful campaign, but if you forgot to back it, you can now pre-order through BackerKit. The link is in the show notes. I also want to plug my own Patreon. Your support means a lot to me, both emotionally and financially. Patreon money is what makes it possible to keep improving my channel by upgrading the equipment, and I'm also hoping to increase the amount of videos I can publish over the course of the next year. If you want to help out, head over to patreon.com/beyondsolitaire. For now, though, let's get on with the show. Hey, gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire. This week on the pod, I have a very special guest. This is Luis Aguasvivas. He is a writer for Pop Matters and for several other media outlets. How you doing, Luis?
Doing well, Liz. Glad to be on the show. How are you doing?
I'm super happy to have you on. We have met up a couple of times over the last year or so, but I'm finally got you sat down to talk on the pod. And I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, me too. Looking forward to our conversation.
So you are in games journalism. So can you just kind of give people the basics of the kind of work that you do and where you do it?
Yeah, it's games journalism is not too dissimilar to other forms of journalism. You write a you know, diverse articles ranging from interviews to critiques. I mean, people usually know those as reviews. Maybe some sneak peeks of specific stuff. I mainly write for Pop Matters, but you can find my writing in a bunch of publications online. Ars Technica is one of them. I have my own website. I've done some work also through New York University. So you find some of my stuff there, specifically talking about the intersections between technology, AI, and race. And yeah, I have a lot of other stuff coming up soon as well, too, with other publications that I haven't worked on with before. So
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited for several things that you have written and will write. So you work across the gaming spectrum as well. So you write about video games and board games. Which of those came first? Which would you say is your primary? And then how did the other one enter the scene for you?
I think which when it comes to writing, video games came first, just because there's more opportunities to write about them. It's also you have the biggest audience as well. Um, so, but in real life, actually, I played tabletop first, then I played video games. I actually got into mainly like collectible card games and trading card games. It's like my first into just like any type of like hobby board game or gaming in general, and then from there, it branched out from there. I mean, I don't really see that much of a difference when it comes to practical form when it comes to tabletop gaming and video gaming. It's a game, so I don't like to separate them. I mean, materially they're different, but outside of that, I mean, they influence each other. Just you see it all the time, like how video games are using specific mechanics used in tabletop games. I mean, famously things like Slay the Spire, influenced by Dominion, and also tabletop games taking from video games, etc.
Yeah, I've actually noticed that I've started to want to cover video games more on my own channel. And at first I felt weird about it, but it really seems like nobody else feels weird about it. Like if I just do it, it fits right in with everything else I was already doing. So you mentioned that video games and board games are similar in terms of form and borrowing mechanisms from each other. But what about like the state of criticism and journalism between the two? Because I feel like video game journalism is more developed. Video games get more attention from academics. Working between those spaces, what are some of the differences that you notice?
Oh man, that's the $1 billion question. Um, well, I'll start with a similarity actually, which is that I think video game criticism is regressing in a way where it's becoming smaller. Like a lot of the best writing, it's either going to be in academia now or it's going to be in blogs or smaller publications, which is something that for the most part has always existed within the board game space. Um, there's not really that much. Well, to a certain degree, there's an increase in coverage. Like places like Polygon now are covering video games as well as they're not board games. I mean, and IGN is also covering board games, but it's I think they stand. It's a lot of them. Also, their origins for both of them are very much based on like consumer-driven reviews. Um, so that's which is interesting when you consider these things because film didn't really have that. Um, didn't really have like that same beginning because it's always been something that it was covered initially as like a technological breakthrough, and then the industry and then the practitioners slash artists always seen this like as very lofty. It's like, oh, this is art. This is the seventh art, etc., and push for it. In video games and board games, even more so, it's not really. It's pretty constantly just stayed within this like realm of just consumer-based reviews. You have ratings for things, or seals of approval, not necessarily a lot of context when it comes to writing. And like I said previously, right, as there's like this regression in like video games criticism that's even becoming even more so, where reviews are, I mean, just quite frankly, like not very interesting. I mean, you're a lot of people just go to Metacritic and see like the score, and it's like, how much did it get? Oh, is it above like 82 or something? Okay, this is a good game. We're gonna get it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I feel like in board gaming, a lot of reviewers have moved away from scores outside of maybe the Dice Tower. So after I left Dice Tower, I quit giving scores, and I didn't. I had it on my blog early on, and then just kind of quit it. Dan Thoreau has totally quit talking about even the prices of games in his reviews. I
That's
feel like,
good.
yeah, I feel like within like, I guess, independence of large outlets gaming, is that also true for video games? Like, are we seeing the same kind of thing, or is ratings endemic to the form?
It's man, it's I think it's still endemic. There's some sites like Polygon that famously moved away from the scoring, and to the point of just like a recommendation seal, which they essentially now have like two. It's like recommends and then essentials. So it's like this three tier. But most of the actual like information comes from like reading like the review. Places like IGN are very strict on that. They've actually simplified it. 'Cause I don't know if you remember, if before they used to have in like even like a they'll give like a game like 7.2 or something, like, or whatever, 5.2, 5.5. Now it's just like straight just 1 through 10. Um which I guess more consumer friendly, but they have doubled down considerably on that, to the point of famously earlier this year their editorial staff released a video which which just blatantly stated like, we're not going to review every game. Obviously we can't, but then also it's like most of them just aren't worth it because most of them are a quote unquote seven, like they're decent, so there's not much to talk about. So I guess they're going to focus on things that are above that or below that because they find it to be more interesting. And this gets into greater questions of like, what does that mean, right, to just like base it on like a rating score. Some of my favorite games and things that I found like the most like meaningful would score like a set, would be within that seven range, and a lot of this independent development stuff would be within that as well.
Interesting. It's really funny that you mentioned that. I did not know that their staff had come out with that about game like ratings. I didn't. I sort of feel like one of my things that I've said about games in terms of reviewing them is that everything is okay. Many games are fine, And it makes it, I think, hard to find kind of grippy ways to talk about them and satisfying ways to have a conversation about them beyond like, is it good or bad?
Mm.
So, what kind of work are you doing that kind of satisfies that for you?
See, that's like the eternal challenge for me. So I'm well, one, I'll preface this by saying that I'm constantly like reading and being like informed by like other people that I respect. And one of the publications that I'm I'm endeared to is the New York Review of Books. And I mean, there's some criticisms to be had about their editorial stuff, but for the most part, the way that they write reviews and criticisms to me has I've always gotten something from it, even if I didn't like what was being written or even the stuff that was covered. The way that they do it is you have a book or two, sometimes multiple books that they will review. They'll talk about it, but they'll give context. Sometimes it's like directly talking to the subject, the history, or something relating, maybe like the author's the person writing the review, and it really leaves you with an understanding just like beyond whatever, like whatever the new like Hemingway book was like in the 60s or whatever. And that's some of the stuff that I try to do when I'm writing as well. It's like I will talk about it. I will talk about, let's say, the newest Zelda game, Tears of the Kingdom. But my review mainly focused on going through the a lot of the stuff that scholar Bonnie Rubrick talks about in her book No Fun or Queer Games. She has a chapter called No Fun, which looks at essentially how doing things that they are not intended within the game that are considered not fun or no fun, in her words, as something that could be enjoyed and as a form of like queer play, uh, which that left a great impression on me. And and I've always wanted to use that. And I found that Tears of the Kingdom and its predecessor, Breath of the Wild, are perfect games with this, where you see a lot of these speed runs where people would do things that are breaking the game or like not fun, like adding these extra challenges to themselves. But while you're watching it and as they're playing, it can be exhilarating. So, things like that, I might even go, you go into a little like diatribe on like certain things that you think about regarding like the game. Like for example, on my website, aguaspoints.com, I'm doing a retrospective on some GameCube games that I enjoyed. And one of them is Pikmin, the very first Pikmin. And one of the things that I talk about the game, but one of the things that I really focus on though is this representation of kawaii within like Japanese like media culture, but specifically how it's presented in Pikmin, which is almost like an apocalyptic version of it, which is the contrast is like mind-boggling. It's like everything's so cute, but humans are dead. Like it's like there all these cute things are like living like within like our like the remnants of human civilization. It's like it's so focusing on things like that and obviously not really caring about giving a score. Like it's within the fruit of the labor is in the labor itself. It's in what's being written. It's not just because I've always found that to be counterintuitive and somewhat disrespectful to the writer where you go through the time to write something and then you give like this score which is like which we know what it is. It's supposed to be the shortcut for the consumer to look at and it's like, oh, is this good or not? Going from a system that is understandable to them because of you know schooling, right? The grading system that they're used to and stuff. So I mean, and even with some of the podcast appearances I've done with Fred Serval's Homo Ludens, sometimes there's like, oh, rate the game at the end, and we'll just say like ridiculous stuff. It's like whatever, like five clocks that are broken out of two, and like we love the game, but and just a more current example. I reviewed Vampire Survivors, which got a re-release, well, a first-time release on the Switch. I eviscerated the game, in my school. But that's on a personal. I mean, I think it's a great game, but I think some of the stuff that it does gameplay wise and speaks to like wider issues within like game design and the relationship that gamers want from games. I don't give games a score. Pop Matters does give a lot of stuff a score. I think the editor gave it an 8. But if you read my review, it's like what? And I thought it was funny. I was like, I'm just gonna leave that there because it's like if you see that and then you read the review, I thought the juxtaposition was, I like absurdity, so
Oh, that's fair. Okay, so I just have to get to the bottom of this. I had a huge Vampire Survivors addiction when I first bought my Steam Deck. It was bad, man. It was really bad. So,
yeah.
what is wrong with Vampire Survivors? And if it was so wrong, why did I hork that thing down like a whole thing of Girl Scout cookies?
That's what I try to
Like,
briefly just talk about. In the review, it's like it's there's a lot of games that are, addictive or have like this loop, this gameplay loop that really grip you, right? But Vampire Survivors is really interesting where you're really doing almost nothing. It's almost like on autopilot for most of the time. You're making very few decisions where like you're moving your character around like this board and you're trying to collect stuff as you're walking. And then when you level up after killing how many hordes of like monsters, you get to choose a power up. But eventually, if you build your character in a specific way, you can just stand in the middle of the map, not move, and everything just goes down. Um, which to me, that's an achievement within like game design to a specific. But it's not nothing's a monolith. So these things also speak to just people want to play something that they they consider to be trying to see how to state this. It's just like they're not wasting their time, and the time that they spend on it, it's also worthwhile. And while I played that game, at no point did I feel that. I mean, my time was passing. It was like eating. It was eating my time. I make a lot of crazy puns to like vampirism, like in my review, because it is like the game is almost like the digital personification of like vampirism. It's like sucking your time away, like vampires do blood. Um, but it's done really elegantly within the game. This is good, and that juxtaposition, which I can't really I would have to think even more about it, but it did disturb me. It disturbed me. It's like I'm spending hours on this. Um, and yeah, I can see objectively how, it's a great game. It's made predominantly by one person. Um, but I do not like when games get so scientific where it's almost they're playing me as well. Like the enjoyment comes from playing the player as much as the player plays the game.
ooh, that's interesting. Do you think that there are any board games that are like that, or is that an experience that so far video games predominate?
That's really fascinating. I think video games, that's mainly something that exists within video games because of just the way that players interact with video games as opposed to board games. I know Cole's talked a lot about this, Cole Worley, um, where you're doing your own programming when you're playing board games. So there's the engagement factor is a lot of it is up to the player. No matter like how beautiful the board game looks, like the production or how the how the theme marries gameplay, you still have to ultimately take that leap of faith that this cardboard and wood is whatever. Let's say you're playing like Catan, that you're actually like a colonizer in like this island. Like you have to still believe that level of abstraction is really gone, especially from modern games. Maybe 8-bit or before 16-bit stuff. You still have to do a little, but now it's like it's the realism of like the graphics and like I said that interaction where especially once you know the language of the controls of a game where it's second nature to you. You just like you don't have to read the rules. The game teaches you how to as you're playing. Speaking of video games here, so that's I think that's one of the ways that video games can potentially be more insidious when it comes to just grabbing the player and just sucking that time away. How many I can spend numerous times where I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna play for 15 minutes a video game. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like 2 a.m. What's happened? I
I've had that
haven't done
problem a
that with
lot,
a board
actually.
game. I haven't done that with. I mean, if I do, it's like I know like where the time is going. It's like okay, I've been because you're also if you're really engaged, you're probably even like walking around or like moving or you know or interacting with other people as well. Um, Also, video games are more solitary too. That's another thing. Even when you're playing with others, you're not necessarily playing with them, in the same room as well. So that
Yeah,
also
I mean,
contributes to that.
I'm a solitary player in general, but I do find board games less addictive. The Skyrim black hole that I got sucked into while I was writing my dissertation was ungodly. Um, but what I'm
How
picking up
did
from
you
our
finish?
conversation,
How did you finish your dissertation?
so basically, okay, I actually had a system. So I would Skyrim was the reward for doing the dissertation. So I get up really early. This is how David Thompson and I've managed to design a board game together. It's because we're both early birds. So I'd get up at like 4 a.m, right? I would write exactly 2 pages. And even if I felt like writing more, I would stop. Then I would maybe take a shower. I would do some research and prepare for the next day's writing, or maybe look ahead to the next chapter and like spend some time, eat lunch. And then once I'd hit lunch, I'd already basically worked a full day. So I would just quit and play Skyrim for like the rest of the night. It's not healthy, but I coped. And I actually came out of my dissertation a complete human being, which maybe it works. Forget therapy. Get Bethesda.
Skyrim. Thank you, Bethesda, for helping with Davidson. Yeah.
Oh, I totally listened to like the Dragon Board song. I was writing like, do, what are you gonna do? But what I picked up from our conversation so far, though, is that I think you and I are kindred spirits in the sense that we're both looking for meaning in how we talk about games. And we're also looking for games that use our time in a meaningful way. And I think that there are two levels at which this is hard. One is that games are treated as and talked about as consumer objects. And the other is I think that culturally, we are conditioned to devalue play. And so, first, I want to talk about, I guess, maybe kind of breaking out of talking about games as consumer objects. How
Mm.
have you been working to do, like, what are some of the projects that you're working on that are bringing you, like, the intellectual and emotional satisfaction that you need? And what are the games that are able to bring that out of you? What commonalities do they have?
No, that's a lot of loaded questions there, but I like it. I like the challenge. So first, just get the elephant in the room out of the way. It's like games are consumer objects in the sense of, I mean, they're made by big corporations oftentimes, and they are marketed as such, and they're also talked about as such. So, but they're more than just that. They're cultural artifacts. They produce culture. Not only are they culture, they also produce culture, and this is also something that we need to deal with. We need to contest with. We need to examine it. Maybe it's just because of my academic training and who I am as a person, but I think eventually once you like something enough or you engage with something enough, or maybe you're just a specific type of person that just thinks critically, the no fun killjoy person, that doesn't let people enjoy stuff. Um, it's You just get to that point that just consuming, in this sense, quote unquote, playing like a game, just sit down and you just play the latest Zelda or Call of Duty, and that's good enough for you. That's fine, but for a lot of people, it's not. And there's a lot to be, to be learned about it, and it not only enriches the individual that wants to partake in that journey, but then also others that want to discuss and learn about it as well. I mean, some of the ways that I personally try to, just get away from this, just consumer product like review mindset of stuff is from that understanding of it. Also, it helps that I don't work for a place like IGN, where even if you might think similar to how I think and you do, is like you do have like this is your job, you have to write about it this way. Who cares? Like you have to stick to this. I have a lot of freedom. At Pop Matters, and then also for other, when I do work for other publications as a freelancer, I'm the one that pitches the stuff. If they accept it, good. If they don't, I'll go someplace else. I can write it for at Pop Matters or my website. So that I understand. A lot of it too for me, it comes from a situation of you know I'm a human being. I live and I'm observant. I see how things, whatever games, whatever it is, like they have meaning, they impact one's life, regardless of one thinks of, like the extent of it or what one thinks or not, right? Like how many people have been like motivated by like a book to do something. Like for me, like the autobiography of Malcolm X was like a huge shift in my life. I know for a lot of men of color, and it's like wow, like this piece of paper, pieces of paper like bounded on this that are sold. I can just think of it as like, oh, there's like a really good story sold to me by you know Alex Haley and the estate of Malcolm X at this point. But it's like no, like there's like meaning there, and people put their time. And when it comes to games, especially video games, like these are like at this point like the most expensive like media to make. I think the new Grand Theft Auto is gonna cost like $2 billion or something obscene like that. It's like
Oh,
it's not just a game. Like it's like, people depend on that for a livelihood. People, use that to motivate themselves to write a dissertation. Etc. Like it's all these things to it. And for us just to look at it, it's like, okay, is this should we okay, is this worth your 60 $70 or whatever, which are a lot of the triple A games are now. It's like, is this just worth your time that you're going to spend? I mean, it's a valid question, but there's more to it. And then also, I'm my politics are fairly left too, so I always look at things from that angle, which is I I'm not gonna if I just go and write consumer reviews, it's mainly gonna benefit the companies. Usually does. And really that whole thing of like beholden to the consumer. It's like most of the places that are consumer driven, with the exception of like Consumer Reports, which is the only one you need a subscription for. All of them are not. They're not subscription based. They get this. They depend on getting, you know, review copies from the corporations. A lot of the corporations dictate it, that stuff, which has been a huge problem when it comes to games journalism. Huge criticisms within gamers. It's like, oh, they were told to give it that rating, or they want this good relation. But sometimes it's true. Sometimes it is true. There's some games that should have gotten lower ratings, because if you read the review, it's like they essentially panned it, but then they give it like a 10 or something. BioShock is a good example of something like that. And other games, like Heavy Rain, etc., are games that got really rave reviews, but now in retrospect, a lot of people are like, no, that shouldn't have gotten what it was gotten. But there was that pressure.
yeah. I guess you have to wonder, is it pressure or is it novelty and excitement? Like, so I
Mix.
have mixed feelings about the review copy issue and all that too. Partially because I absolutely do shit on review copies, first of all. Um, but also, I mean, for me, I want to be taken seriously as a critic. And I sort of feel like, well, people send their books to the New York Times and people send it to the Washington Post. So, like, why? do I get treated differently for receiving the same review copies that an actual news outlet would receive? And like, am I not an out? Like, what is the line between somebody who is an influencer and somebody who is media? Like, I view myself as media, right? But then what is it that I'm really doing? I have to ask myself that all the time and ask, like, where are my lines and, what do I need to disclose? Um, the other thing, though, is that, like, I definitely have games that I loved more 5 years ago than I do now. But is it because you can't step in the same river twice? Or is it because I was really excited about a relationship with a publisher and
Mm,
I went for it? Like, honestly, in my case, I'm pretty sure it's just that my tastes have changed. I've taken such a hard swing towards historical gaming, that some of the stuff from my previous life doesn't look as exciting anymore. But you never know fully, I think, because you can't see yourself the way that an outsider could see you. So, I mean, how do you feel under those pressures? Like, do you just have, do you take review copies? How do you get your games? Like, I'm just curious now.
yeah, no, seldom do I take review copies. I mean, they can provide them. I mean, through Pop Matters, it's sent through to the editors, and then they
Mhm.
essentially tell us, it's like, are you interested in reviewing so and such? Sometimes some developers or publishers just directly contact me because they've gotten my information some way or another. Um, I seldom take reviews partly because of that. I just want to, as much as possible, just eliminate that potential conflict of interest. Um, but sometimes I understand the material conditions too. Like, are you gonna buy absolutely everything that you're gonna cover, especially how expensive a lot of these things end up being? And then it depends too. Are you someone that's more interested in covering things that are more current or not? Then that also has to be taken into consideration. But if I ever do get anything, there's a few things that the publishers, developers have to know. I might not even review it. I might not even
Mhm.
open it. Um, and similar to you, which I've done for several things, Vampire Survivors one of them, and a few books on games. Um, I might not like it. I mean, and it's not that I'm going to, eviscerate it or write like something like bad, because I always try to, at the very least, like, make it meaningful. Maybe I don't like the game, but maybe there's something that the game has that I can discuss. For example, earlier this year, I reviewed a book by Daniel Dockery called Monster Kids on essentially the Pokemania phenomena in the United States. I did not like the book. I think it's very clear for people that read it, but I took the time to talk about the phenomenon because it's so very important in my life. That was that TCG that I talked about earlier that got me into games was Pokemon trading card game. When I was when I was like 8 or 9. So I do have like I and it's something that I also know a lot about because I've read extensively on, and I've actually done research through an organization that I'm also a part of called the Multiplay Network, which is a community of scholars covering game studies, and it's just lacking. And one of the things that really pissed me off about the book is during a lot of the book itself, and then just the talk about it and how some publications were talking about it because they were friends with the author. It's like, oh, this is the first book on the subject. It's like, hell no, it is not the first book on the subject. And I took the time in my review to talk about that. I mean, there's books written even during the phenomenon in the early 2000s about Pokemon. A lot of them were academic books. I actually have one here, which is Pikachu's Global Adventure, an edited volume by Joseph Taubin and stuff. I mean, it's some of his essays are really good. There's actually a few essays here that are like 15 pages that are better than Monster Kids, which is like 200 like pages. But that's the subject. So for me, I try to, you know, just transparent within it when it comes to reviewing stuff because it does play a role. I mean, and you constantly have to like play this like mental game with yourself when you're looking at this. And you have to be honest. Like sometimes, yeah, you might like the designer a lot. Maybe that time you just really like the game, and then over time you're like, I just don't like it that much anymore. Or it is that it can be like a relationship that you but that's the thing about writing serious criticism, right? Then you're actually able to think about that, though. You're like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And hey, if you're not beholden to writing just consumer reviews, you might add like a few sentences or paragraph around the line about another game that you're writing, that you're reviewing or discussing. You can be like, hey, this designer, this I played a game that I really liked, but looking at it, and you know and you're enriching yourself, you're enriching your readers, and hopefully they're getting more out of it than just it's like, yeah, I should spend my $40 on this, and spend probably just look at the box and unbox it and then never freaking play it again, which is how many. That's the thing too, most of the stuff that's being made is not getting played, video
Oh yeah,
games
that's true.
or board games. It's like, so then, we're just a lot of it too. You're just like abating, just helping, just rampant consumption just for the sake of consumption and stuff.
Yeah, it's a bummer. I do not keep games that I'm not playing because I just can't bear it. Like I feel really bad for a game that I think I'm really not. There's something about it where I want it to find a home where it'll get played. But if most games are fine and people only want to play great games, then there's also a lot of games that are just never going to go anywhere. Or
Yeah.
like,
I
even
mean,
on Steam, I pick up lots of stuff in Steam sales for like $2, and I'm like, when am I going to play that?
yeah.
Or like, oh,
Well,
let's play this for 15 minutes.
you want to talk about probably one of the most interesting and depressing things, hopefully that somebody will write down the line, is just like examining people's like Steam playlist. It's like what has actually been played out of the thousands of games that this person has like bought there.
Ooh, oh, that's a
Yeah.
harsh,
I mean,
reality.
no, if I was a publisher, what I would do is I would just like, put one of their big games on there on Steam, and just after like a year, just like complete drop any support for it. And people will still pick it up in the sale. And then, nobody's gonna play it, and you're just banking and not having to spend any money, on keeping servers or whatever. Um, it'll happen, trust me. Even when people find out, people are still gonna buy it.
That's cold. That is so cold. So, talking about kind of like existential emptiness and all that. You and I have also clearly, I really love your comments about being really moved by literature and your interest in looking at literary criticism and bringing it into your work on games. I think that, we kind of want to see board games and video games as in the same boat together. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But I really do like to look for my reviews as well at what are the book people doing. And
Mm,
the literary world is having its own crises, right? With things like Book Talk and Bookstagram and arcs, and we're all having the fight about review copies and about was this there's every I think every industry where people buy things is now trying to deal with like the internet and influencer culture. But I also think that it's I think people inherently think that books are somehow classier than games. And how do you do as a critic? Is that something that you experience in yourself and that you've had to stamp out over time because of your own preconditioning? And what can we learn from literary criticism and film criticism even as we talk about and write about games?
yeah, I mean, for me, at this stage, I don't see a difference when it comes to like the level of seriousness, right, that I should engage with, with games as opposed to books, which I review both. And I mean, at one point, yes. And I think certain things, I think definitely if I play a game that I don't like or I feel a specific way, I might, get on my high horse and become the curmudgeon, which is like, no, like books are better than games, and but vice versa. I can like read a book that's like complete garbage and then I'm playing against like, man, this is so much better than that book that I was, so um But I mean, games are interesting though because they're multimedia though too. Like there's books and games. I mean, you're talking about Skyrim. It's like there's books in Skyrim. I mean, one can argue like their quality depending on like other stuff, but their books there, and a lot of them are written really well. Um, for me, when it comes to just to tackling like your question like head on though, I there's a lot to be learned from other forms of criticism. Um, and I think there's a lot of really great like critics that cover games. There's a lot of great websites like No Escape, like Deep Hell, Critical. These are smaller websites that do great work. Upper Crit, for example, which are sites that are not very well known, but if you read their stuff, it's like to me, it's comparable to some of the great like writings when it comes to books, especially like right now. Um, so I don't really. I mean, I get why people feel that way, but it's like books when books first became a commercial thing, it was like the end of the world. One, it was like you're wasting your time. Like, why are you doing this? A lot of it was really some of it even anti-women in a lot of regards. It's like because a lot of it was, I guess, associated with women reading. It's like, why are you doing like wasting your time like this? You should be like at home. You're getting these stupid notions in your head, this fantasy that's like ruining your life, etc.
Yeah.
It's so knowing that context too, like just knowing that, it's like, well, this is similar to what's going on with games. Even when I play now, like, a lot of people, it's like, oh, why are you wasting your time with this and stuff? And it's not necessarily that they're wrong or they're right, but it is a question and you can decide to like think about it. And oftentimes I engage with that. It's like, well, am I? And then, you can get in and get mean. And it's like, oh, so you're watching your reality TV watching is like worse than me, like, playing Tetris, you know? So, whatever.
Yeah, that's true. You can really get this slippery slope of like, well, my media is more critically impressive and intellectual than your media. And like you could just do that with anything really.
I mean, we're all just profoundly wasting our time. It's like once you
We gotta
know
do
that,
something while we're here.
yeah, I mean, yeah, and hey, it's great. Like we're also the only species that's like productivity. It's like you think like a penguin, like what it's like. No, when penguins like chilling like on the beach, they're just like, yeah, this is the life. It's like, yeah, we should. I mean, at one point, hopefully, we'll get to a point that people can do that with, and be fine. But who knows? Doesn't look like it.
So, given that we talk a lot about kind of meaning and criticism and all that, actually, I have two questions. I'll start with the less profound one first. So, we talk a lot about doing criticism and being anxious about interactions with publishers and about displeasing publishers because of what we've written. Do have you ever actually had that happen? And also, this is a conversation that happens in book world all the time, right? Is it appropriate for publishers to interact with you about your reviews, or should they leave critics alone?
Fascinating. I would say, man, I man, that's a really good question. I think when it, I'll answer your last question first. Like, should publishers leave? I think I think ideally yes, but obviously they. I don't know. It's also weird, right? Because if a publisher, especially if it's a small publisher, right? Maybe it's like self-published work, whatever, either video games or board games, and the person's really passionate about it and they feel like a specific way about it, I understand why somebody would reach out, especially if they feel it's unfair. And it happens, like a lot of reviews are crap. um and or even ones that are good, maybe they did miss like a huge point because they were just fixated on like one thing, and they might feel so. I understand. I think a lot of it is you have to be civil as much as you can. And it's fine if you tell me, if a publisher reaches out to me and it's like, hey, you reviewed this, we didn't like, you got this wrong. Or even like if a fan, it's like, it's fine, but when you start saying like, oh, you're a moron, like I'm gonna come into your house and I'm gonna kill you, which is a huge thing in video games, like criticism. I know like Gita Jackson, for example, her review of Final Fantasy 16, which was fairly positive. It was just she was just talking to some of the issues in the story of the game and its representation of slavery. People just went bonkers. It's like whoa, like this level of like, obviously that's like beyond like the publisher, but it's getting to a point where a lot of these media properties and a lot of these things are so much part of people's identity that they
Yeah.
just feel a specific way about it, and has created, I mean, for me, I don't even think that at the current level of like a lot of fandom is is performed is even that anymore. It's like a bunch of zealots at this point. It's really dangerous when it comes to, and then getting to your first question about relationship with publishers and like how they feel. This is not even about a game review, but I wrote an article for Ars Technica about an exhibit that the MoMA did called Never Alone, which was essentially looking at video games as in their way as interactive design, which is also I agree. And but it's essentially, if you want to really get down to the nitty gritty, it's like them like presenting their canon, right? But their canon is one of the interesting things about it. Is like, they're a museum and they're only going to present stuff that they that is part of their collection. So these video games that are part of the canon are part of their collection. So that means that they had to get it from the publisher, the creator, etc. Had to be give them access to the video game. And in this sense, when it comes to video game preservation, what is that? Is the actual code, which
Hmm.
we can see how that can be. Some companies might be like, I don't want to do that. Like maybe like you can get like like a cartridge or a CD and play that there, but we're not going to give you the code. A lot of companies did, like Sony, so one of the big game publishers and developers. There's several games in the MoMA collection. The same with Microsoft. I mean, Minecraft. They have the code to the original Minecraft. Things such as that. But one of the things that I found interesting when I was talking um, to the people working on that, Paul Antonelli and Paul Galloway, was, hey, Sega and Nintendo are noticeably absent from here. Um, and that led to them talking to me about Nintendo being absent. And I wrote stuff about that. It was just really interesting. Nintendo just didn't want to eventually. I mean, it was a long process. It seemed like they were all in. Miyamoto-san, the creator of Mario, Shigeru Miyamoto, he was all in. They were telling me how they were sitting. Their lawyers were talking. It seemed like it was going to happen, but eventually the very high ups in Nintendo were like, no. A lot of that, the code stuff is part of it. A lot of it is Nintendo's also making a museum in Kyoto for their history, and they want to have that there. And Nintendo has worked with other museums as well, exhibiting stuff, but a lot of it's like media properties, like art for games or etc. But it's never been to, okay, we're gonna give you the code of Donkey Kong, or we're gonna give you the code to, or share the code, Super Mario Brothers, or The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, etc. And I wrote about that, and Nintendo they were like, oh, it's not like that. I was actually also the first person to talk about this. It's actually still barely, I don't think there's any other article that has that information on there from the last time that I've checked, several months ago. So they were, I guess they were defensive. A lot of it gets to do to going back to our last question about when it comes to criticism and you know how games are seen within like the cultural like milieu. Are they like art? Are they like literature? Are they that high up? These companies care about that. They do,
Hmm.
just as like fans do. And but mainly though, a lot of it is just, I think for the companies it works a little different, because for them it's like, we make a lot of money, but then for then also us to be in a space, right? Like the MoMA, like the Met, right? Except it's like it gives us that extra stuff because what do like billionaires want more than anything once they have like all the money? They want to be known as like, like the nicest, most charitable people, the art patrons, whatever. They fund like a hospital or whatever, even though like their company, makes like cancerous chemicals or whatever, like stuff like that. Like it's they care about that a lot. But they still reached out to me and were like, hey, it's not like that. And so I don't have the best working relationship with Nintendo. Also, they didn't like my review for Tears of the Kingdom either, but whatever. The fans also didn't like it. So I got a few death threats for that too. But yeah.
Oh man, I've only gotten one death threat. I hope I never
Jesus.
receive another. They're sort of harrowing. But yeah, what's funny is like you can talk about it on this much higher level. For me, it's much more personal because in board gaming, everybody's friends.
Yeah.
So even if I bought your game, or even if the publisher sent me a review copy, like odds are at this point, especially in the historical space, I might know that designer, or I had know a friend of friend. Like we're there's a very short set of relationships between me and them at a maximum. And it's really interesting to put out a review that your friend is going to watch. I personally do find it very awkward, whether it's positive or negative. Like I don't necessarily love it when I put out a positive review and then somebody, like, if you want to just put it on your site or whatever, or like have your own tweet about it, that's, but I always get a little embarrassed when it's like, oh, Liz loves our game. Here, you should go get the game. Because, to me, that's never really what I see myself as doing, if that makes sense. But also when it's negative, I really hate that sort of like, well, thank you for considering my game. And I'm just like, why do we even have to have this interaction? Like, did you just want me to know that you saw it and that you knew I didn't like your game? Like, I despise it. And like, this, even if it's somebody I have a great relationship, it's not like something I take personally forever or anything, right? But I would personally rather never interact with someone about something I read about their game because I kind of see it as separate from my relationship with them. And I'm about to enter this space as a game designer because David and Thompson and I have a game coming out, probably in 2024. And I have already decided David likes to read reviews of his games. I'm like, I don't want to know. I said what I said. I'm putting it out there, and I don't want to know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't want to read I mean, I don't even read my stuff once I publish them. Like, it's like I just out of sight, out of mind. So I can't imagine like wanting to read like something by somebody else about something that you spend so much time on. Um, I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess. Well, why does David like? Did he tell you why does he like reading reviews? What does he
well,
get out of?
David really cares about feedback, and like I know that I should, and I think that we use it like feedback is good. You should accept feedback as like a reason to torture ourselves though too.
Yeah.
Like basically, if Dave is gonna read all the reviews, when I get feedback, I like to be packaged in a way that's like not super raw. Like I just want to know the upshot. I don't need to read everybody's feelings about whatever I did, and that's like at work. That's in my teaching, evaluations. I want to know, okay, people like this, people didn't like this, you should change X. Okay, that's it. That's all I need to know. So I personally would not want to read through somebody else's raw feelings about something I made. But of course, I have the privilege of knowing that David will do that for me. So I don't have to go look. I can just let him do it. And if something important happens, I'll know.
Yeah, it's
But
it's it's good to have a teammate like that.
yeah. But it's not that I can't take criticism because I don't think that I'm perfect or that I did everything right. It's more that I don't want to manage my own emotions about something I made and somebody else's at the same time, and I feel like they're entitled to their feelings. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that that's a really tough thing when everybody in the industry knows everybody else. Like you can talk about money and free review copies and stuff all you want, but like you have to be willing to spit in your friend's eye if you're going to be real about games in this industry. And I feel like the kindest thing for all of us to do is just let it happen and not look. Like
Hmm.
just how, you know what I mean? Like I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, this is and this gets back to our stuff about like, writing writing about games, you know, in the view of either like consumer product or, you know, with more context and a more critical lens. If you really are writing at that critical lens level, you give more room to, to have, as you're saying, like these situations, right? Yeah, I didn't like it, I wrote about it. But as you're doing it, right, you're unless like the actual like the game itself is just like abhorrent, right? Like the theme is abhorrent, what it's trying to say it's abhorrent, right? You're gonna talk about it in a way that it's in a consumer review. You're just gonna be like, this is trash, right? You can play all this that's better, and that's it, and
Yeah.
you're gonna move on. And you might like talk a little bit about why, but you're not really like talking to it and talking to, to the readers and potentially even like the developers, um,
Yeah.
in a way that can be constructive. I personally, I just don't find consumer reviews to be unless it's like I'm actually wanting to buy like a phone, like an actual like a piece of tech or a table or something.
Right.
Like I yeah, for something that's, that's so subjective when it comes to taste, right? Like it's like I don't want a consumer. Imagine a consumer review about a book. Imagine that's fucking hilarious. It'll be like, well, the paper quality is absolutely garbage. The font, I can't read it, and that's it. But they don't talk about the content of like it's like no, like who cares? It's just like this, like the material, the literal material, which a lot of these things end up being. It's like, oh, I don't like the unless it actually like affects gameplay and stuff. It's like, oh, like
Yeah.
why like who cares you didn't like the pieces, the wooden pieces are like it's like come on. That's just my take on it. Like it's
Yeah. Of course, what I'm always down to talk about, and I think you're the same, is I don't necessarily want to like get into the nitty gritty of what people like and don't like all the time, but I do want to talk about what somebody is saying and whether they successfully said it and what we choose to stand by in our games, and then what we look back on and think like, maybe I could have said that different. Because I do think that games are communication, and I think that that's a conversation that's outside of a review. That's why I have a podcast, and then I also have a channel where I do reviews because it's not the same conversation.
mhm.
So I don't know how much of your work is critical reviews at this point, and then how much are you doing other stuff? Because I know that you do like long form projects and things as well.
Yeah, I think at this point, it's a shotgun wedding for me. Like it's all married together. Like it's because that's what I find like the most like interesting. Like to me, the challenge is like, can I do a critical review and also communicate? And obviously that takes form in two ways. It's like within like the actual like what I actually write,
Hmm.
and then also do I use that then to start something else, like a different project? Like for example, I did the panel with Fred on Colonial Games, the Homo Ludens YouTube channel. Now that actually started with me first. It started with me first going to PAX last year, PAX Unplugged, talking to some publishers, talking to some designers, Mary Flanagan and Cole Worley being two of them, and just like talking about their work and like their relationship with that, because it's a topic that I'm really interested in, just even outside of games. I mean, from my background and a lot of like my scholarship, being a Latin American, is a lot of that, it's just so prevalent. Um, so I wanted to see that within this space, this hobby that I liked. So I talked to them. I wrote a small like piece in on my website, called "What Painting Glory at PAX Unplug." And then from there, I springboarded that to creating these relationships and communicating with others, communicating with Fred. Then we did the panel. In conjunction with the panel, I reviewed Mary Flanagan's book, which you also reviewed, here with Jason Perez. Um, so like all these things to me, it's like if a topic is or whatever is like interesting enough, it just doesn't have to be just one thing that I just like write. I can engage with it on several different levels. And a lot of that, we're fortunate living in a time where, we can, media production and cultural production in a specific forms, it's accessible to so many people, right? And it's really like empowering. That's another thing that upsets me about this whole like consumer review thing, or just like looking at it from that, which you can. I know I'm fairly negative on those, but like if one person wants to go that route, that's completely fine. But it's like we have all this access to this stuff and to different forms of like media that we can interact with. And also a lot of people that are doing this, it's as a hobby as well. Like, why am I going to spend my precious time doing something like that? You know, for me personally, I'm going to go like all the way. So it's not just that, part of it's because I'm a nerd. So it's not just like, okay, do I like the game? Does the game work? It's like, okay, what are games that are similar to this? Like, what does the game actually like speak to? What's like the reactions that people have as they play the game, and what does it make them think about, etc. Right?
Yeah.
And just from that, it's just like really easy, which anyone who's playing is asking these questions. At least I would hope to I would hope that they're asking these things.
Definitely. And speaking of asking these things, so I've kept you for a while, so I want to kind of ask a fun question towards the end here, which is, what are some games that you have played that you feel were time truly well spent, that really meant something to you? We've talked a lot about kind of the empty hours, consumed by games,
Yeah.
but what are a couple that really, were beautiful use of time?
Oh man, every time I play Tetris, I think it's like it's incredible time spent, and I think it's yeah, it's one of those things that I know has enriched my life. I would say that, just seriously. Um, that's one of those, and it's one that you can just play 5 to 15 minutes, and that's it. You get it. You get a full experience. You get, which I wish more games were like that. Um, I think I played Pikmin 4 recently, which just came out. That's an incredible game. I think that was time well spent, um, completely. Oh, since you cover board games here, I'll say, let me look at my shelf here. I will say a game that I really, really enjoyed recently, it's time well spent, is I would say War of the Triple Lions by Knack War Games. That's a game that since I've gotten it, I've played that and I really enjoyed. Um, Quacks of Quellenberg, like that, and pretty much anything by Reiner Knizia. I think it's a time well spent.
Oh, that's awesome. So basically, like a full range of topics and types. It's
Yeah,
just something
there's
that
so much
was,
stuff.
oh god, there is so much stuff. It's unbelievable, actually.
Yeah.
So my best time spent was Vampire Survivor. And I'm playing with you. Um,
Hey, I mean, if someone enjoys that game and they good for them. I personally, I didn't feel that way, but
I'm just giving you a hard time. Yeah,
no,
we were talking
no.
about it for the show, and I just released a glowing review of it recently, but I was just totally floored by Pentiment. Like, I bought a gaming PC this summer, and I'm glad I did it so that I could play $20 game Pentiment. Worth the PC.
I mean, there's things like that are like that. Like when I first got a Switch in 2019, the first game I got was Tetris 99, which is like a initially like a free game if you just get the Switch online, right? But I spent the
Yeah.
$10 so I can get like the full thing, and it's like what I spent $300 to play a potentially free game. I'm like, oh, this is incredible. This is it. Like well, money well spent.
Oh man, and then since I'm gonna direct people to your work, I'm gonna ask generally where you can be found online, but also what should I link in the show notes that you're the most proud of?
Yeah. So you can find me at Pop Matters. I've actually had two articles published just last week. A review of Vampire Survivors, which we talked about, and I reviewed an album by the rapper No Name. You can message me later if anybody wants to know like why am I also reviewing like hip hop stuff, but that's actually like my first like passion. So, but yeah, you can also find me at my website aguaspoints.com, which I post weirder articles there, shorter stuff, and then through that website too, keep a I keep essentially a list of everything that I publish. So that's pretty up to date. I'm not on Twitter anymore, so that's really the main ways. And oh, also Homo Ludens. So if you give Fred some money, you can interact with me and stuff and find out what me and Fred are working on. So
Fantastic. Luis, thank you so much for coming on. It's been such a delight to get to chat with you for a bit. Obviously, I'll be annoying you on Discord later as we plot our coup of Discord. But seriously, thank you so much. It's been really fun to hear your take on criticism and how to do it in a way that's meaningful.
yeah, it was great. Thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody out there, I can be found anywhere online as Beyond Solitaire. Please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.